to solve our domestic discussions. I am asking you to leave a light on so that we can find our way home.
Only 6 MEPs among 750.
Well, good morning, Finlay. Thanks for phoning in. An independent Scotland would have more MEPs than we do just now, based on countries of similar size. I think I'm correct, and if my memory is correct in saying this, will be correct if I'm not getting it entirely right, would have about double that. Of course, the European Parliament is one of the institutions of the European Union, and independent Scotland would, have a commissioner and be at the top table in the European Council as well. I mean, people ask me sometimes, and it's on the face of it, on the face of it, I think, on the face of it, that's a question. Why do you want to be independent of the UK but be part of the European Union? And my answer is that these two things are not the same. Every member of the EU is an independent country. Every single member country of the European Union is an independent country. In Germany, Spain, Portugal. To France or Germany or Spain or Portugal. In Germany, Spain and Portugal. The fact that Portugal, all of these countries are independent, but they come together in the EU to cooperate and collaborate. Together to collaborate and cooperate. And collaborate, pool sovereignty where it makes sense, pool sovereignty where it makes sense, sovereignty where it makes sense, sovereignty where it makes sense. We want Scotland to be an independent internationalist country. We want Scotland to be an independent internationalist country. Internationalist country. Internationalist country. Many of the countries that are of a similar size to Scotland and already independent. Independent countries similar in size to Scotland all over Europe. They're richer, they're more prosperous. Why shouldn't Scotland, with all want to stay in the European Union? We want Scotland to be an independent, a European nation, an independent, a European nation, a European nation. Look at many of the countries that are of a similar size to Scotland and already independent. Many of them perform better economically, and I never thought it's the strongest argument for the Union, for proponents of the Union, to say that within the Union, Scotland has a massive deficit. If that is the case, then it's an argument for change, not an argument for staying the same. And if we've got a big deficit because of that, that's not an argument for Scotland staying the same. So what responsibility of the current Westminster system of government? So if it's a bad thing, it's not an argument for staying the same, it's an argument for change.
Point. She decided to up her game, so to speak. But oh no, the proverbial notepad quotes. It was after the 2017 election, where the SNP initially lost a third of their seats, where Thin Lips decided to put independence on the back burner, and she was going to wait until the end of the Brexit process. I'll wait for some clarity to see what to do from there. That's what she said at the time, which justified silence in relation to talking about independence. But it wasn't long after that fact that the retention swiftly changed, trying to stop Brexit. And that's where the focus was, for the best part of then until now. People's Vote campaign after People's Vote campaign, focusing on trying to get rid of no deal, as well as voting down everything going, constantly pushing for more delays, which is all very well and good, apart from the fact the SNP were claiming the electorate believed that independence was the #1 priority. And remember, she claimed that independence was on the back burner. So it was a rather bizarre change of direction as far as the SNP were concerned, constantly delaying any form of Brexit, which flies or flew in the face of their mandates. The circumstantial change required, which would have justified or given them the grounds to call for a second referendum. But instead of allowing the process to play out in order to pounce upon said change, they in turn continued to try to stop Brexit. And now we are where we are, where they have a year left before the 2021 elections roll round. They lose their mandate, potentially get ousted, with no referendum to show for it. So credit where credit's due in that regard, as they're still trying to stop Brexit. Their cringe-inducing bus says as much, as well as their claims of wanting to lock the Tories out. But in the event of locking the Tories out, in the event of a hung parliament, in the event of Labour requiring the SNP to prop them up, dramatically increases the likelihood of her obtaining a referendum of her own. As any time before now, if they had been successful in stopping Brexit, they would have had no mandate. But come the election, if any of those hypotheticals come to be, not only will Brexit potentially be stopped, but she could find herself in possession of a referendum, meaning that the Powerpuff Party's count will be none the wiser to her lies. But waddling about from pillar to post, all corners of Scotland, while occasionally going down for another cringeworthy debate in England, there's a phrase that she keeps repeating relentlessly, and that's this BS about Scotland's right to choose, it should be up to Scotland, etc, etc. And the only thing that has prohibited Scotland having the ability to quote-unquote choose its own future up until this point is the fact that the SNP have prioritised trying to stop Brexit for the whole of the UK. So, fundamentally, the one thing that they must at all costs avoid is the Tory party obtaining a majority. Because as things currently stand, they have no mandate, despite their initial claims of putting it on the back burner, etc. And if the Tories win, then potential capitulation awaits. As she'd have to be held accountable, having to explain to the electorate that the only reason Scotland isn't seeing an independence referendum is because they decided to try and stop Brexit for the whole of the UK instead. And speaking of an independence referendum, their buzz, their rhetoric, their timing, everything about this, it's got fuck all to do with independence. Whether you agree with me or disagree with me on the viewpoints that I have in relation to Thin Lips and the Rainbow Unicorn delegates, one thing is abundantly clear. They are doing exactly what I said they would do. They are falling back on their plan B and exploiting independence, but they have completely devalued independence and they're merely treating it as a stepping stone so they can potentially avoid permanent exit from the EU and drag us straight back into Europe. And this is all based on Thin Lips duping the voters in 2016, running with a false narrative ever since, never being called out by the media, nor ever seen any pushback from opposition politicians. Which does lead me to believe that there's a high probability that the two hypotheticals in which the SNP were able to have the balance of power, quote unquote, are a lot more likely than first thought. There has to be some underlying reason as to why those hypotheticals keep being spoken about more than the rest. The fact that the SNP get to run their mouth, or her in particular, whereas Boris Johnson can't fart without people calling him a racist and whatnot. Same with Swinson every time she decides to conjure up a leaflet. But yet Thin Lips can run around and just barefaced lie. And nothing. Why is that?
That were you to support a Labour government, you would insist that they gave the Scottish Parliament the right to decide the timing of a Scottish independence referendum. But can I also just pin you that, which is presumably you would expect if there were a Labour government, the Brexit referendum to come before the Scottish independence referendum. That's definite, isn't it?
What I've said and what Labour have said, look at what I've said and what Labour have said to the extent that you can work out with any clarity what Labour says on Brexit. I've said, and I've said before this general election was called, that I want to see an independence referendum next year. In the latter half of next year, Labour appear to be saying they want an EU referendum in a shorter timescale than that. So that appears to be the sequence of events that we'd be looking at. But in terms of getting away from the timing and on to priorities, I want to see a second EU referendum because I think it's right for the UK to have the opportunity to escape the Brexit mess. But that doesn't necessarily and inevitably solve Brexit for Scotland. We could end up with the same result we had in 2016 of Scotland voting to remain, but the rest of the UK voting to leave. And
ever since she misled people in 2016, she has twisted that vote and made it her own. She is full of fucking shit. However, this is their latest BS excuse that regardless of whether or not there's an EU referendum, it doesn't settle the matter and Scotland could be at risk. Brexit would loom in the background, therefore we need another referendum and independence. Which calls into question why they focused all that time for 3 years trying to get a people's vote. What was the point of that? What was the point in the constant campaigns and the focus on trying to get a people's vote? If you're now going to turn around by your own admission and proclaim that it wouldn't settle the matter.
This democratic deficit that Scotland finds itself in, of which Brexit is only one example, albeit a very... can only really be a deficit that Scotland finds itself in, of which Brexit is only one example, albeit a very serious and extreme one.
In your mandate, it literally talks about being taken out of Europe against our quote-unquote will. Hence you doing what you did to make sure that you obtain that mandate.
Scotland being in charge of our own future through independence, and I think that's the choice that fundamentally people in Scotland need to have.
Oh yeah, well the only reason that they haven't had it up until this point is because you've been trying to stop Brexit for the whole of the UK.
But again, though, on a related point, if the Brexit referendum comes first, and if, and it is an if, the UK were to vote to remain in the EU, the sort of material change...
Now, obviously, if the question is going to be something along the lines of, would you stop campaigning for a second independence referendum, she's hardly going to turn around and say yes. Because bearing in mind, as I said, in the event of a second EU referendum, how that circumstance would have come to be in the first place, Helmet Head would probably have already secured a referendum of sorts. But ordinarily, if there wasn't an election on the horizon, and this was a completely different time frame, the SNP would no longer have a mandate, which they currently don't anyway. However, questions like this allow her to run her thin-lipped mouth, or the question is going to refer to the mandate, in which the response will be something to the effect of contempt, cast aside, ignored, etc, etc. It's just such fucking BS. Absolute BS.
There's a reason for an independence referendum, at that point would be gone. So would you at that point decide, OK, well, we won't have the independence referendum for a while?
But by that point, as I said, she'll have already obtained a referendum, buck she.
Might decide we won't have the independence referendum for a while?
No.
Why not?
No, because, and I've been making this point, well, I'm about to tell you if you give me the chance.
Sorry.
I've been making this point throughout this campaign, and actually for some time before this campaign. Brexit is just one illustration. It's a very extreme illustration of the
only one.
Faces of where we can have our future decided for us, imposed upon us, rather than being in charge of that. And the way in which Scotland's interests, views, voice has been cast aside over the past 3.5 years, in my view, means that Scotland has to decide whether it wants to continue to put up with that or be in charge of our own future.
Who was spearheading people's vote campaigns, had Beta Blackford and Joanna Cherry centre stage for the court cases, played a pivotal role in ensuring no deal was removed, put one proposal forward which was rejected. That's about it. The people in Scotland that have been ignored from day dot are the ones that voted to fucking leave the European Union. But you pretend they don't exist. Because you're so obsessed with remaining in the European Union that you're quite prepared to shaft the country or scapegoat it in the process. You're a treacherous bitch.